Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon in our offices here in the Bronx, New York. It is November 24th, a Friday, the day after Thanksgiving here in the United States, but I believe this is a day of thanks around the world, given what has happened. There is a ceasefire in the Middle East. It is important. It is critical. But there are parts of this that need greater attention because not everyone is being helped. We'll talk more about this in just 1 second. But first, we do want to mention, if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And of course, every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out across all the internet, across the entire world, to hear what you have to say about the issues that affect you. Because we believe in the First Amendment. Even if your government does not agree, even if the internet overlords don't like it, we want to hear your voice about the issues that affect us all. And we hope you'll join us this Sunday as well. But the big news today has to be the fact that there is a ceasefire in the Middle East, that Israel has agreed to a ceasefire with Hamas, the elected representation of the people of Gaza. Now, this is important and it is critical to understand this in some detail because it affects not just the United States, but many nations around the world. And it has a serious impact on our future. So let's talk a little bit about this. To properly understand this, let's go back in time a little bit. What we know for sure is that on October 7th of 2023, Hamas, a known terrorist organization, which also happens to be the leadership of the people of Gaza, decided to unilaterally go out and kill women and children and innocent civilians in Israel. That is a fact. There is no way to rewrite that, though some individuals like Representative Rashida Tlaib of the United States Congress would like to make it something else. The fact is, it was an act of gross terrorism that resulted in, depending on who's counting, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,600 civilians being killed. Somewhere around 242 individuals taken as hostage from individuals from multiple countries, not just Israelis, but individuals from multiple countries being taken hostage, used as human shields, tortured, and in some cases killed. This was all done by Hamas unilaterally, and it is an act of terror. It has been denounced by most nations in the world except for Iran and certain terrorist organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. We know for a fact that over the weeks after this, the days and weeks since that attack on October 7th, Israel has rightly taken the position that they must defend themselves and their people and those foreign nationals that are in their land. No one disputes that. They should defend themselves from terrorism, just like the United States responded to terrorism, like we have seen many nations in the world react to terrorism. That's fine. And some may disagree with the level of reaction. That is a separate issue. We're talking about the hostages. What has also been happening, as we have discussed on this channel in our weekly live streams as well as many videos, is we have seen a subculture of hate that has taken voice, that has reached out. We've seen this from Harvard, from Cooper Union. We've seen it at Columbia University and Cornell University, where a surge of anti-Semitic indoctrination has shown its face. At the same time, we have seen that the American news media and many of the international news media have had a reduction in their coverage on what actually is happening. We have seen that as activists and organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America and TIFA have, as the progressive far left, have become more and more vocal to support Hamas, a terrorist organization, the American news media and many news media around the world have stepped away from reporting the full scope of what has happened. We've seen that from the initial reporting describing the 33 Americans that were killed by Hamas, civilians, women and children killed by Hamas, that has disappeared from the headlines or the reporting on the ongoing Israeli-Hamas war. We saw that from the initial reports of over 22 Americans taken as hostage and human shield, being tortured and sexually abused by Hamas. We then went to see that number turn into 9 and then completely disappear from the headlines in the United States and several other countries. Not that these hostages have been returned to the United States or released by Hamas. No, they continue to be used as human shields. It's just that the news media didn't talk about it. The same news media that graduated from Harvard and Columbia, that graduated from Cornell University and many of the universities across America, where they were indoctrinated to believe that Hamas, a terrorist organization, were the good guys. Of course, the left-leaning nature of the American news media was supported by many politicians, individuals like Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders came out to admonish Israel in its defense of its people while completely ignoring the Americans that died and the Americans that, even as we speak, remain hostages and human shields that have been tortured by Hamas, a terrorist organization. That's critical to understand this, that there is a U.S. interest in what is happening in the Israeli-Hamas war. Not only because America fights against terrorism, not only because Iran, the global sponsor of terror in the world, is the direct support of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and their goal in each of these organizations and in Iran is to destroy America, all of America, liberal and any other part of America, and Israel. There is a direct American interest here. We have hostages that we need to return. We need to get our American citizens back home. But this seems to be less and less of an interest, both in the American news media as well as many politicians. Not just Bernie Sanders, but the entire Biden-Harris administration. In a rare piece of coverage by ABC News and the American news media, in talking about the debacle that was the Afghanistan rout of the Biden-Harris administration, we find out that 2 years later, Americans remain hostages in Afghanistan, that Americans have been abandoned by the Biden-Harris administration. In fact, in the very brief reporting, according to ABC News, over 900 Americans, not the 100 we were promised September 1st of 2021, but 900 Americans have returned to the United States, mostly without the U.S. State Department. As we have learned from the various departments of the United States government, hundreds of Americans are currently held captive by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and are being tortured in Afghanistan to this day. But the news media doesn't like to talk about those hostages. They don't like to talk about that conflict that continues to affect the entire world. Given that the Biden-Harris administration doesn't like to talk about the Americans they have abandoned in Afghanistan, Ukraine, Sudan, and now in Israel, given the fact that we have seen the news media fortify elections such as the 2020 election, and we believe ongoing on the 2024 election, that the facts are being judiciously obscured from the American people to minimize the national interest of America in what is happening in Israel and Hamas. Again, because Americans were killed by terrorists and Americans have been taken hostage and are being tortured by terrorists. This is something that you don't hear from Harvard. This is something that is not being promoted by the Democratic Socialists of America and Antifa, as they say that they are pro-Palestine, a place that doesn't exist. but yet it is a time of thanks. Due to the conversations of many nations in support of their nationals that have been taken hostage by Hamas, the terrorist organization, in conjunction with international pressure for humanitarian aid of the Palestinian people in Gaza, we have seen a ceasefire take place. Currently, the Biden-Harris administration is trying to find a way to spin this without being insensitive to the Americans that died, to the Americans held hostage, and yet take advantage politically to sate the Democratic Socialists of America, the socialist leftist wing of the Democratic Party, to try and satisfy them to maintain his hoped-for ability to be reelected in 2024. And we see this in much of the news that is being reported now by Politico and other organizations. And what is of interest in this reporting about the Biden-Harris administration trying to say that they were key in the discussions and negotiations of hostages is the very brief and almost non-existent discussion of those hostages themselves, and the fact that those hostages, at least some of them, are Americans. Again, this seems to have disappeared from the discussion in American news media talking about this. While we are told there are multiple nationalities of these hostages, it is almost non-existent, the description of these hostages, as in they are American men and women and children. That just seems to not exist. Of course, that would go in line with the fact that they're trying to spin this as a success for the Biden-Harris administration, where they have never had a success in any of the operations in the Middle East since Joe Biden has taken place. So that again leads us to today, the 24th, Friday, and many nations that are celebrating the start of a 4-day, possibly 5-day ceasefire that Israel has agreed to release up to 150 prisoners taken during their retaliation against the terrorist attack on their country, as well as Hamas agreeing to release up to 50 hostages, human shields, that they have taken. This includes mostly women and children that they are using as shields. Many of these women and children in serious need of medical aid, both because of the torture, the sexual abuse, and the violence enacted against them. But if you were to look at the news coverage of this, especially from the left, like organizations like Axios, that's not what you're going to hear. You'll hear about the 12 individuals that were released from Thailand, because the Thai government actively sought out Hamas through Qatar, through Iran, to negotiate to get their people back home. And that's why they received 12 of their citizens and have been released. The Philippines received one of their individuals, one of their citizens, released by Hamas, the terrorist organization, and the remaining 13 individuals that have been released and confirmed at this time are Israelis. Barely acknowledged by Axios is the fact that there are Americans. We don't know. It could be 22, it could be 13, it could be 9. The number continuously changes in the reporting, but a more than insignificant number of Americans remain hostage and human shield for Hamas, the terrorist organization. It's something that the left does not want to address. They do not want to discuss this because it changes the way the United States in this regional war, as well as it changes the effectiveness of the Biden-Harris administration. The Biden-Harris administration wants to take credit for what other nations did independent of the Biden-Harris administration. Thailand didn't rely on Joe Biden. They spoke to Iran directly. They made the negotiations with Hamas and Israel directly. That's why they had their people released initially. Where are the Americans? If the Biden administration is now claiming that they were critical to having these hostages released, where are the American citizens? Why have they not come home? Now, it is possible that in the 50 individuals that are going to be released by Hamas, we may have some Americans that are returned back to our home. We would hope that is the case. And we would hope that it would be all of the Americans held hostage by Hamas, a number that we cannot guarantee. We have no clear understanding because the news media refuses to tell us. It's not that this is an unknown number. It is that the news media doesn't want to talk about it. Axios barely wants to mention that Americans are directly affected by this, by the terrorist organization Hamas, whom they are supporting in their pro-Palestinian comments. So we, in this day after Thanksgiving, as many Americans are out shopping and much of the rest of the world are beginning to start to rejoice, those in the Philippines, those in Thailand, those in Israel are starting to rejoice because they should, because they have their people back home. We have to take a moment to pause and to consider, does Joe Biden deserve any credit? Has he done anything that has been beneficial to America as well as our ally, Israel? So far, Joe Biden has given or attempted to give Hamas, a terrorist organization, $105 million in aid. That's not a positive. He is funding global terror. That's not a good thing for anyone. He has ignored the Americans that have been killed. He has ignored the Americans that are held hostage, just as he has ignored those Americans in those same situations in 3 other countries in 3 years that he has been in office. I, like many around the world, are happy to hear that Hamas is giving up its human shields, that they are ending this continuous act of terrorism and allowing people to go home. And we hope that the at least 242 individuals that were suspected to have been held as hostage are released and that each and every one of them are whole. But we know that that is not true. We know that many of them are in severe medical conditions. We know many of them have been tortured and sexually abused. We know that they have been used as human shields and that some of them have died as a result of being human shields. There is no answer to easily and immediately end terrorism in the world. We wish there were. There is no absolute political answer to this. And we don't expect the Biden-Harris administration to have the singular perfect answer. That's not what we're asking for. We are asking for accountability, and we are asking for effectiveness. The Biden administration cannot tout itself as being an effective answer to the Israel-Hamas war when Americans aren't coming home, when they won't even address the fact that Americans are directly affected and therefore our national interest is directly aligned with results in this war. It's a heavy subject. Most Americans are still enjoying the holiday of Thanksgiving. They're out, some of them shopping today, even with the horrible economy, trying to prepare for Christmas for their families, and that's a great thing. But we cannot lose sight of our national interest to protect Americans at home and abroad. We cannot praise the actions, the lukewarm actions of the Biden-Harris administration while Americans remain in danger. 30,000 Americans remain in danger and suffering at this moment. We look forward to finding out what you think about this. Is it enough for hostages, human shields, being released from every other nation in the world except the United States? Is it a success? Should the Biden-Harris administration claim victory and successful influence when they fail to address or return any American citizens? Should our focus solely be as Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Socialists of America and Harvard University and the colleges in the United States, should we be focused only on Israel and trying to punish them for defending their people as the United States government fails to defend our people? Where do you stand on this? And we hope you'll join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to talk about this and other issues affecting America and the world. Obey and believe. Hell no! I'm happy to be here with you today. Understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee has no idea what she's talking about.
You can meet a very, very stringent accuracy rate when it's important, when it matters, like in federal elections.